All right, so today we're going to be talking about the GDP, which is gross domestic product. So at the end of this, you should be able to understand the various components of the gross domestic product, explain why sustained growth in GDP per capita is desirable, and you should be able to calculate data regarding the GDP. So what is GDP? Gross domestic product is the value of all final goods and services produced by a country. It's a measure of aggregate output defined in terms of the current price level. So really it defines how well a nation's economy is doing. It's useful for making comparisons over time or between countries. GDP only measures the final products and not intermediate ones. So like it won't measure all the components that go into making a computer, it just measures the final computer. Intermediate products are used when producing a final product, like steel for a car. Counting only the final products eliminates double counting, so it gives you a more accurate number. So it's important to remember that GDP does not include all economic activity. The following items do not get counted when measuring the GDP. Used goods such as cars or houses, financial assets such as stocks or bonds, anything not produced within a country's borders, which is why there's such a huge argument over producing stuff in China and shipping it over to the United States. Household production or subsistence farming. Underground markets or unreported economic activities such as a lemonade stand. And the amount or distribution of wealth in a country. The first way to calculate the GDP is to add up the value of all the final goods produced in the economy. So we have, the economists only count each producer's value added amount. So your value added is the sales price minus the price of inputs. So how much it costs to make. So for example, a wheat farmer grows a bushel of wheat that costs $1. So value added equals $1. Price of input, you just use wheat that he had before, which is 0. So his value added is $1. A miller buys the wheat for $1 to turn into flour, which costs $2. So the miller had to spend $1 to get the wheat. So that's his price of inputs. But the cost that he sells it for is $2. So his value added is $1. And then the baker buys the flour for $2 to turn into bread, which costs $5. So his value added is $3 because he had to spend $2 to get the flour, but he's selling the bread for $5. So it's kind of like profit. And then the grocer buys the bread for $5 to sell it to consumers for $9. So his profit or his value added is $4. All sales total $17, but the GDP is only value added, which is $9. So this would be the total sales, but the value added is only $9. The second way to calculate GDP is to add up all of the money spent on final goods and services. Spending is divided into 4 categories. The first is consumption. This is usually the way the United States does it. Consumer spending on final goods and services is the largest category. Then we have investment. This describes the fact that firms also spend money on final products. It does not mean financial investment. So like businesses, they spend money on products. So like the schools, they bought the computers. That would be a business spending money on a final product. The government also spends money on final products. Governments also require products to do their work. and net exports. Some products get bought by other countries, but we have to subtract products that we buy from other countries. So we add the products that we make in the United States and send off to other countries. Those are our exports. But we can't count the things that we import, the things that we buy from China and Taiwan and all the other countries. The third way to calculate the GDP is to add up all the income received by firms or businesses from the sale of final goods and services. So wages, some of the money earned by firms gets paid to workers as wages. It's your paycheck. Interest, some of the money earned by firms must get paid to the people who have lent the money firms. That's paying back on your loan. Rent, some of the money must be paid to rent the land used for production. And profits, once wages, interest, and rent have been paid, all the remaining income is considered profit. Then we have nominal versus real GDP. Nominal GDP is the current dollar value for 1 year's GDP. The real GDP, however, is much more useful because it's corrected for inflation. So use the real GDP to compare over years. Real GDP tells us how much a change in GDP is due to a change in output. So how much more stuff are we making? So for example, suppose in year 1, 50 apples are sold for $1 a piece. Suppose in year 2, 60 apples are sold for $2. So we have to figure out what the nominal GDP for year 1 and year 2 is. So let's calculate that. So you multiply the quantity times the price. So for year 1, it's 50 times 1, which is 50. For year 2, it's 60 times $2, is 120. So now what is the GDP for each year if we only use the price from year 1? So the real GDP is 50 and 60. So let's look at the graph to our right. So what do you notice about this graph of nominal and real GDP? They kind of match, right? They both go up, but then in 2000 they cross over and our nominal GDP starts to increase more than our real GDP. So real GDP per capita is the key statistic used for tracking the health and growth of an economy. So you find this, the real GDP by the population of a country, to divide the real GDP by the population of a country to find the real GDP per capita. So let me write that down. All right. So for example, the real GDP of the United States, so that's 15, let's see, that's 100,000, million, billion, trillion, 15 trillion, 681 billion, 500 million, divided by the 315,439,603 people of the United States. So the real GDP of the United States is 49,713 people dollars per person. So the US real GDP per capita has steadily grown over time, which is good. That means the United States is doing well. But we have this little dip. The US has almost 3 times as much purchasing power per person as it had in 1960. So that means people have more money in their pockets than they did in 1960. Other countries, however, continue to have low real GDP per capita rates. So very low income, so you see Africa has less than $2,000 a person. The Asian countries over here, low income, $2,000 or more, below 50, so it's between $2,000 and $5,000 per person. Middle income, 5,000 to 25,000 is this light purple. And then high income, $25,000 or more per person is the dark purple. And so usually this is what we mean when we talk about first world countries, second world countries, third world countries. So now you should be able to understand the various components of the gross domestic product, explain why sustained growth in GDP per capita is desirable, because we got more money in our pockets so we can buy more products, and we can calculate the data regarding the GDP. So now let's look at the homework. So let me pass out these papers. Give you calculations. Sorry, Sean. All right. All right, so our directions. Each section below contains problems associated with a particular aspect of the GDP. Use your knowledge of GDP to answer each question. You may use a calculator if needed. I just handed those out. So the following tables list GDP data for a fictional economy in 2 different years. So we're going to pretend this economy only produces these 3 items, which would be a really crappy economy, just saying. So what's the nominal GDP each year? So remember, our formula is quantity times price for nominal, I can spell, GDP. So if our formula is quantity times price, 2 times 50 is what? It's 100, right? 5 times 35. I gotta pull out my calculator too. Is that what it is? Yep. And then 10 times 15. That should be 150. And so now we're going to add those 3 numbers together.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
That's why I handed it to you. 375? I got 425. Double check me.
Yeah,
425.
but that's what it's all of.
Well, hold on. So now you're going to do the same thing for year 2 over here. So price times quantity, 3 times 45. 135. 7 times 40. 280. 11 times 25. 275. And so now you're going to add those 3 numbers together. 135 plus 280 plus 275. 690. All right, so now we're gonna look at the real GDP. So you gotta follow these directions for number 2 right here. Says now calculate the real GDP for year 2 using year 1 as the base year. This means to use the year 1 prices with the year 2 quantities. Use the table to the right to fill in your calculation. So we're gonna take these prices. So our price for cookies is $2. Our price for donuts is $5. And our price for cake is $10. Because we're using the year 1 prices to find our real GDP. And so now it's just the same formula. It's still price times quantity. So it's 2 times 45.
Yeah,
90. What's 5 times 40? 200. What's 10 times 25? 250. Now add all 3 of those numbers together. 90 plus 200 plus 250?
It's 500.
It's 540.
I need ready for testing.
She's not here.
She's not in here.
No, she's supposed to be in here, but she's not here today. All right, so now we got our year 2 real GDP table. So how much did nominal GDP for year 2 overstate the growth? So it's asking you to compare this number, 690, with 540. So what's 690 minus 540? 150. So you'd write something like year 2 nominal GDP overstated the growth by 150. Does that make sense? Yeah. No, he's doing really good this year. All right, so let's look at GDP per capita, number 4. So it says, circle the country you would expect to have a higher GDP per capita based on its location. So letter A, Kenya or Germany, which do you think would have more money per person? All right, so which do you think has more money per person, Kenya or Germany?
No.
Kenya or Germany?
I'm gonna say Germany.
Germany.
I'm dead.
You're right. What about China or the United States? China, consider the population though. China has a huge population, so you'd be dividing how much they have per person.
So United States.
I would say United States. What about Australia versus Brazil? Australia. Remember, biggest continent? No. All right, let's go back to this. All right, Argentina or Nigeria? What do you think? Argentina is over here. Nigeria is over here. Nigeria? It's Argentina.
You said that because I said Nigeria. She said bro. Yeah.
All right, now India or Spain? Let's look at our map. India is right here. Spain's right here. India's It's Spain, because Spain's in the high income category.
No. Sit back.
All right, number 5 on the back. Each group of words below lists one final good and some intermediate good. Circle the one that gets included in the GDP. So remember, the final good is the one that gets included in the GDP. So for letter A, is it wheat, flour, or bread?
Wow.
Flour is the final product?
Bread. It's wheat. Bread. It's bread.
It's bread.
You talking about, see that you confident, right? Come on. It's wheat.
All right, letter B, potato chips, potatoes, salt, or oil?
Potato chip.
Potato chips. Letter C, steel, lawnmower, plastic, or wiring? Lawnmower, it's final product. Lumber, shingles, house, concrete.
Man, bro, get out. You can't keep it like.
Leather, baseball glove, or stitching?
Baseball.
Baseball
Glove.
glove.
Glove, not baseball. Baseball glove.
Book, paper, ink, binding material. Book.
Yeah.
All right, you guys got final products down. All right, suppose a car manufacturer sells a car for $22,500. In order to purchase the car, he purchases steel for $8,000, plastic for $2,000, and electronics for $6,000. How much has been added to the GDP?
So we gotta have all that. Yep.
So let's, hold on, let's go back and look at our PowerPoint. Always go back and double check. So here's our value added model. So we start with bushel. So what we're doing is we're taking, let me pull my calculator out here. We're gonna take 22,500 and we're gonna subtract 8,000. And then we're gonna subtract 2,000. And then we're gonna subtract 6,000. So the profit is 6,500. So that's really what the value added model is profit. How much are they making? So how much has been added to the GDP? $6,500. Does that make sense what we just did? So you're just subtracting all these numbers from the 22,000. So I'm gonna put 6,005 if I can.
We're gonna do the same thing for number 8.
That is not what I wanted. There we go. Oh. So number 7 says, each item below describes an item that is part of GDP. Which component of GDP does it fit into? So remember, expenditure equals consumption. So it's buying things. Investments, that's a company buying things, the government buying things, and then the things that we sell to other people. So a college student buys a new textbooks. Is that consumption, investment, government, or exports? Consumption. That's somebody buying something. So if a bottling company sells its soda to Japan, is that consumption, investment, government, or net exports? Remember, consumption is people buying things, investment is businesses buying things, government buying things, and net exports is us selling things to another country. Net export.
What she just said, she just described it.
A new water treatment facility is purchased by the city. Government. Remember, the city is government. A new business purchases a new set of computers. What's our last one? Investment.
Are we doing anything? Oh, and I want to ask you something too. They had been adding stuff on.
All right, number 8. In 2011, the United States economy had a GDP of $14,991 billion, according to the United Nations. So if consumption was $10,729 billion, government spending was $2,591 billion, and net exports was negative $568 billion, how much was investment spending? So this is a math formula. So our expenditure was $14,991 billion, and then our consumption was $10,729, and I'm using this formula right here. So we're finding investment, so I'm going to put an I right there. And our government spending was $2,594. And we're going to subtract our negative 568. So now, so you guys take math. How are we going to find I?
Oh, no.
Well, let's rearrange. Ooh, I did not mean to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move this I over here. So now we're going to do this part of the problem first. You see where I put the parentheses? So we're going to do 10,729 plus 2,594, and then subtract 568. So that's what I get. Double check me. Right, good. So now I'm going to replace our parentheses with 12,755. So now this 12,755 is a positive number. So in order to get this I by itself, I have to switch it over here. So I have to subtract 12,755 from 14,991. So we're going to do 14,991 minus 12,755. And so that leaves us with 2236. And so make sure that you put in your $sign and let me know that it's in billions of dollars. Does that make sense, or is it clear as mud?
Yeah.
It makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. All right, number 9 and 10. So this is going to be the same process, except we're looking at a different formula. So each item below describes an item that is part of the GDP. which component of GDP does it fit into? So we have income equals wages, that's what people bring home, that's your paycheck, plus the interest, that's what businesses pay off, your rent, and your profit, how much money you're making. So letter A, after a CEO has paid all of his costs, he gets to keep 3.5 million. So which one is that? It's profit. A manufacturing plant must make a monthly payment for its loans. Is it wages, interest, or rent?
Right. I think, wait. Oh, no.
All right, well, let's skip it. It's interest, yeah. Because that's what you're paying on your loans. Employees must work a minimum of 40 hours to get paid a salary. So what does salary fall under? Wages or rent? Wages. The last one, a coal mining business pays for the land it uses to mine from. So what's the last one we got? Rent. So in 2011, we're on number 10, the United States economy had a GDI, gross domestic income, of approximately $13,548 billion, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. If wages were $8,340 billion, interest payments for $516 billion, and rent was $430 billion, approximately how much was remaining for profits. Now we're going to do the same thing that we did up here. So our income, so it says our GDI, gross domestic income, was 13,548 billion. And then our wages, I'm using this formula. Wages were 8,340 billion. I can spell billion, I swear. And then plus interest. Interest payments were 516 billion. And then plus rent was 430 billion. And then we need to find out what our profit is. So what's the first thing we're going to do?
That answer, 8, we're going to answer 8, 5, and 4.
Yep, so we got to add these three numbers together. So let's see. 8340 plus 516 plus 430. That's what I get. Make sure I'm right. You got the same thing? Okay. So then we're going to 9286. So we got 9286. Whoops, 6. That's wrong. There we go. So now we have, so in order to get this P by itself, what do we have to do with this 9286? From? So we're going to take this over here and we're going to subtract it from this 13,548. So we got 13,548 minus 9286. And so 4262 billion is equal to our profit. Am I right? Perfect.